Thank you to each of you. Mr. Bridenstine, let's start with China, a topic you addressed at some considerable length. China is on an aggressive timeline to put astronauts on the lunar surface by 2030, and they appear on track to do so. They're also currently operating a space station right now in low Earth orbit. Mr. Bridenstine, China is racing to control the moon and low Earth orbit, and they're not shy about using space to expand their power on Earth. If America doesn't beat them, if we cede the lunar surface or continuous presence in orbit to Beijing, what does that mean for our national security, our economy, and America's leadership?
Very important question. So here's how I view things, and I think the general will appreciate this from my time as a lieutenant in the Navy. We did joint professional military education, and we learned this thing called the DIME theory of national power. And in each of those elements, you have, it's an acronym, DIME: diplomatic, information, military, economic power. When I was at the helm of NASA, my goal was to always think about what we're doing in those elements. How does this advance diplomatic power? How does it advance information power, military power, and economic power? On the diplomatic side, you mentioned the International Space Station and the next generation commercial space stations. On the diplomatic side, we have like 15 different countries that are operating the International Space Station today. We've had astronauts from, I think, 21 different countries at this point. We've had agreements with actively, I think we've got over 600 or 700 agreements now internationally as it relates to missions. NASA is a key element of diplomatic power for this country. I will tell you, I don't think it's often used correctly. I mean, we could put it on the table for a whole host of, kind of carrot and stick kind of activities to benefit the United States of America and an America First policy. That's the way I thought about it when I was the NASA administrator. On the information power side of things, one of my big things that I had, one of my first eye-opening experiences at NASA, when we landed InSight on Mars. This was a lander that was going to land on Mars and help us understand Mars quakes. Like, how is it organized inside? Well, when we landed InSight on Mars, it was on the cover of every newspaper worldwide. That's amazing information power, including one newspaper was the hardline newspaper of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. Now, I'm not saying we want to win their press, but at the end of the day, it was a story about how we landed on Mars.
But their Sunday comics are excellent.
But it was a story about how we landed on Mars, and it was a story about how we did it, when we did it, what we were doing, and it had a list at the end. The last was all of our international partners that participated with us in that. This is a newspaper in Iran where they don't get good information about the United States of America, but when we land on Mars, it changes things. It changes the perception of young people towards this country that we love. And I think that's an important power, information power. Of course, everybody likes to talk, Apollo 11 when we landed on the moon and the whole world watched. I mean, that's information power that we reference even today. If we can land on the moon, why can't we do these things? That kind of thing. On the military side, NASA is not strong. We don't play military. We don't report to the Secretary of Defense. But a lot of our technologies and capabilities, in fact, have dual use capability. One thing that concerns me greatly right now is the devastating consequences happening to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California, JPL. They're the ones that build all the Mars landers. They're the ones that have landed on Mars 9 times in history. But a lot of that technology, make no mistake, has military application, and we're at risk of losing a lot of that. So I think that's important to note as well. Finally, that's the military side of things, but it's really not where NASA plays. NASA plays in exploration, science, discovery. The E, and this goes back to the opening statements, the E is economic power. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, regenerative medicines, advanced materials, article came out, China is using their space station to create new advanced materials for hypersonics, materials that my understanding is we don't have right now, although maybe somebody knows something I don't know. At the end of the day, we have to use microgravity, where we know atoms and molecules organize differently. We have to use it to our advantage, and advanced materials, China is doing that. And we're not doing it the way we should, and we're at risk of losing it. So all of those elements, I think, are important. When we think about the great power competition with China, we need to think about NASA being used for diplomatic power, information power, military power, and economic power.
Thank you. Gateway will be America's eye in the sky in cis-lunar space, extending our lunar surface program by enabling longer missions, heavy equipment delivery, and protection of U.S. assets, while paving the way for advanced infrastructure like Interim Administrator Duffy's goal of a lunar nuclear reactor by 2030. Meanwhile, China has made it clear that it intends to build its own cis-lunar station as a platform to dominate the moon and to pursue critical resources such as helium-3. Mr. Gold, in your judgment, why is it critical that the United States lead with Gateway and cis-lunar before China builds its own cis-lunar station and uses it to control the moon?
Thank you, Senator. When I was at NASA, I got a briefing on our ability, or should I say inability, to monitor Chinese activities in cis-lunar space. I didn't sleep for a week. You hear democracy dies in darkness. Our freedom could die in the depths of space if we are not able to monitor and understand what's happening with space situational awareness around the moon. And relative to nuclear on the moon, you mentioned helium-3, it's not just about the moon, it's about Earth. The countries and companies that control the moon will control the Earth. It's just a matter of time. Rare earth elements, helium-3. We need to be able to extract these resources. We need to be able to learn to live off the land. I'm a native of the great state of Montana. Did a lot of camping and fishing back in the day. I can't imagine going on those camping trips if I had to bring all of my air, all of my water, all of my food, all of my oxygen. You can't have a sustainable, robust presence or support economic activities if you can't live off the land. And we can't do that without nuclear. And I cannot praise Secretary Duffy enough for acknowledging that this isn't about just going back to the moon. This is about going back to the moon, harnessing its resources for the Earth, and establishing infrastructure and a permanent presence. The Secretary gets that, and I applaud him for moving forward with nuclear. And by the way, breaking news, our friend Amit is now the Associate Administrator of NASA. And again, I very much appreciate Secretary Duffy's decisive action, his decisive leadership in elevating the head of the Moon Mars program to Associate Administrator, the highest civil servant post at NASA. That sends an important message, not just to NASA, but to our international partners and even to China, that we're back. We are reigniting the torch of Artemis, and we're going to go forward to the moon. I can tell you the NASA civil servants needed to hear that. And again, I'm very grateful to Secretary Duffy for making that point. At Redwire, we're developing a system called Mason that's going to use microwaves to sinter regolith, to create landing pads, berms, roads. We need to be able to build that infrastructure. But more than anything, we need to be able to rebuild our credibility here on Earth. When I was negotiating the gateway agreements with the European Space Agency, and thank you for that privilege, Jim, they learned one thing about popular culture, maybe from the comics and the Tehran Times there, Lucy and the football. They told me, Lucy and the football, why should we sign up with you? Trump administration will be gone in a year and a half. We would look foolish for making that investment. And I told them, you know what, you're right. Don't listen to me. They're justifiably skeptical. NASA has failed to sustain a beyond LEO human spaceflight program since Apollo. Failure hasn't just been an option, it's been a certainty. So how did I convince the Europeans? Senator Cantwell, I had your help. And I told them, don't listen to me. Listen to Senator Cantwell. Listen to Senator Nelson. Listen to the bipartisan coalition that Jim Bridenstine created. Because if we lose, then they will carry forward. And if we cannot show that we can be a good partner, that we can be a reliable partner, all the benefits that we talked about, diplomatically, economically, will go to others. We're talking a lot about Star Trek. The reason I love Star Trek, not just the adventure, not just the stories, but because it said we're not going to have just better technology, but a better future in space. We launch not just our astronauts and hardware, we launch our values. And if we can't move forward with Gateway, if we can't move forward with Artemis, we will lose that future to the Chinese.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. I will say I was disappointed with both of you that you guys left Matt Damon on the surface of Mars. But other than that, you both did an excellent job. Ranking